While Steve Witkoff is in Russia today trying to finalize a deal to end the Russia-Ukraine war, or at least end the American portion of it, present a plan that Donald Trump is willing to live with and find out if they can have the same thing agreed to on the other side of the line. There are more problems with Europe and with Ukraine because they seem to be on a very different sheet of music, and that sheet of music seems to be diverging as the hours or even days go by. And try to make some sense out of that, we have with us today the smartest man in London, Ian Puddick, who's not in Greece today, so he's actually back in London. And, of course, the ever-popular Gary Villapiano. So we're going to try to figure out what's going on here. And you can – I know you do that every time, but look, I mean, you just got to call it the way it is. We are unintimidated.
I think my mum's paid you a lot of money to say that.
Listen, I want to start off today because we were talking about some of the problems with Europe, and you on X earlier today, you seem to be sharing some of that frustration of your own from your own UK here, where you said that the Starmer government continues to frighten Brits into thinking that war with Russia is happening. EU wants to keep the Ukraine war going long enough to last until the election, and hopefully the Dems will get back in office and finish off Russia. But then you said NATO war games many times. NATO entering Ukraine in September 2022, 60 to 80,000 NATO soldiers dropped into Ukraine could push Russia out in 2 to 3 weeks and have air superiority in 3 days. But then other simulations, some come to somewhat different outcomes than that. I just wonder, first of all, just kind of what got your goat there that you wanted to tweet on that this morning.
Yeah, just the conflicting narratives. Just the conflicting narratives that are pushed, obviously, by the state, and then obviously parroted and repeated by the media. And they can't have it both ways. They can't push a narrative and stick strong and really drill down on it, and then repeat something that that undermines their narrative in their own way. They can't have it both ways. And because the state and the media are so aligned, there's no one really holding the mainstream media to account, and let alone the state. I mean, apart from people like yourself, Judge Napolitano, my friend George Galloway, you know, Alexander, the two Alexes, or Alexander and Alex at the Duran, you know, independent media is really where it's at now, unfortunately. Definitely. If you want to delve down and understand what's going on, you've got the mainstream narrative, a counter narrative, and people are intelligent. They can look at both and draw their own conclusions, which I think is the appropriate response. But before we came on air tonight, just 10 minutes ago, just off air, off camera, you showed that clip of the head of NATO. And what did he reiterate? Russia is the long-term threat. Hang on, what about the short-term threat and the medium-term threat? Why the long-term threat? You know, it was only 18 months ago that Russia was going to invade Poland. You know, so where's that all gone? Is that just off the table now? And Russia said, "Don't worry, we'll do that long term." It's nonsense. You know, and every day the BBC and all the British press are saying Russia's on its legs, its economy is about to collapse. They're out of that. The BBC, Russia's out of ammunition. The soldiers are fighting with shovels. That's a BBC headline. So that's fine. So we'll assume that's true. So why is Russia a threat to anyone? If that's true, they just can't have it both ways. And just to be clear, because I didn't think I made that clear actually in my tweet. So they weren't talking, NATO weren't talking about NATO going in September 22. They war gamed it in September 22, as they have done many times. And in their September war gaming, they came to the conclusion that if NATO dropped 60,000 to 80,000 crack troops, NATO troops, across Ukraine, they could push Russia out of Ukraine within a few weeks and have air superiority within 3 to 4 days. I mean, it's Alice in Wonderland stuff.
What?
And the people that I talk to don't believe it, by the way. But that's the narrative. It's for the public. It's for the public.
Yeah, well,
because the military don't believe that. The military don't believe that.
You know, I wonder if whoever ran that simulation in September 2022, I wonder what they thought in June of the following year when, golly, what was it? It probably was somewhere around 700,000 Ukrainian soldiers, or at least maybe 500,000 actually on the line, tried that very thing to push Russia out with all of the NATO training, everything except the NATO air power. That was a major difference between it. But then they literally broke their teeth on the first one, because the first line of the Russian defense. Because if you don't have a substantial number of engineering cassettes, if you don't have a lot of well-trained armor, if you don't have the ability to suppress enemy air defenses, etc., you can't breach a deal. To me, as an armor guy who was trained in Europe, really, and fought in a tank war, those are like fundamentals. You have to have all those, or you can't even fantasize about doing anything more. And 60 to 80,000 Brit soldiers or Europeans, whatever, are not going to make any difference when the Russians had all the stuff that they had. So I just wonder what they were thinking about that.
I mean, where do you start? When you say who's thinking about it, do you mean the public, or do you mean within?
Well, if there was a simulation, that means somebody put the inputs into a simulation, a military simulation, and think they're going to come out on top. And that, I don't think that's a wise course.
Well, you've got the people at the top talking about the Ministry of Defence. You've got the gods within the Ministry of Defence, the policy makers, obviously input from the Foreign Office. We both know our friend Steve Jermy, who was a director of the policy unit that will be putting strategy together and bringing in all of the various, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, bring in the strategy so that it's all aligned. So you've got all the believers at the top trying to formulate policy.
By the way, Steve Jeremy wasn't one of the believers. I just want to be clear on that.
No, he was always, I mean, if you talk to him about his previous experience going back in time, he was always very grounded. So, when you had lunch with him, I think 3 weeks ago, we were talking about this, and he was saying, we could not beat Russia 30 years ago. Right? Now, Britain's in massive debt. And I've said this, forgive me for parroting and saying the same thing on your show again, as I do all the time. Britain's in massive debt. We're only very small. The Ministry of Defence have several storage facilities for weapons and arms. The two biggest in Bicester and in Telford are depleted. Words of the Ministry of Defence officials, not mine, are depleted. And yet we can take on Russia. We couldn't do it 30 years ago. We're now depleted and in debt, and we could do it. And our Ministry of Defence, the actual service itself, has shrunk. I mean, it's nonsense. I mean, I'm not, I don't want to sound unpatriotic, but I'm trying to be realistic. And that's what you get with Steve.
Even in your X post this morning, you had a screenshot of a Newsweek article that came out yesterday. Gary, if you can toss that up there, because this comes to probably a closer to not that one. Probably comes something of a more realistic view. This says NATO nation overwhelmed by Russian missiles in war game simulation. This is yesterday. It says the UK could not successfully fend off Russian missile strikes during a simulated attack on the soil or on British soil carried out after Moscow launched its full-scale invasion on Ukraine. So the British officer that was quoted in that article said, "Yeah, we couldn't get that done, and we'd suffer a lot." So it sounds like, unlike the 2022 deal, this one seems to be more grounded in reality. Now, here's the kicker: if you recognize that, and I think it is very valid, then that should change the rhetoric coming out of your politicians. But as you point out, it doesn't.
No, the politicians are on a path to nowhere. They were on that path to nowhere, holding the Americans' hand. The Americans have left that path, and we're still on that path. And it's crazy. It's crazy. I know. Yeah.
Hey, Ian, aren't you struck by the fact that with Trump, backing away or turning around and walking away, that there is not a second take from your president, from your prime minister?
Yeah, but you've got to. If you put it on a timeline and look at, say, for example, Starmer pre-Trump, we've got a very, very strong anti-Russian sentiment, anti-Russian Cold War mentality. Trump comes along, and that hasn't changed, because if you put yourself in Keir Starmer's position, how does Keir Starmer undo all the nonsense that he said? I mean, he had to have a very embarrassing meeting with Trump and David Lammy, the foreign secretary, where they had personally smeared Trump personally. I mean, you wouldn't do that in business. In business, you wouldn't smear a potential customer, then have a meeting with that customer and hope it would go well. So why would you do that in politics? It's the arrogance of these people that they would do that and get away with it.
So their fear and their hatred of Putin overrides anything that's going on in reality with America basically.
I think so.
Stranding them.
Yeah, I think so. They're believers in a cause, and the cause is a righteous cause because it just depends on what cause you believe in. I've said this before. If you believe that, I mean, I'm going to digress slightly, so forgive me, but I will bring it back to exactly what you've said. In the UK, I really like him. He's a Marmite figure. Lots of people love him. Lots of people hate him. There's a guy called Andrew Neil who was Rupert Murdoch's right-hand man, and he's on the right of politics. But I personally think he's Britain's best political interviewer. You get Andrew Neil, forgive me, quizzing and questioning any politician from any party or background. He is really robust and gets to the heart of matters. And I personally think he's very fair because he's hard on everybody. He's a really, really tough interviewer. He's friends with George Galloway, and I think politically they're sort of miles apart. But I think they really respect each other, which is important. And he just tweeted last week. I was going to reply to it, and I thought, what's the point? He reported that Putin invaded Ukraine, and it was absolutely unprovoked. Now there's a whole encyclopedia of evidence. You might disagree with the evidence, you can challenge the evidence, but just to say that it doesn't exist, and there's one narrative. Putin woke up one morning and decided that because he's the next Hitler and he's so powerful and arrogant and full of hate, he's going to invade his neighbor and kill loads of people. If that's true, which many people believe, and I would suggest the majority of people in the UK believe, because of the government and because of the mainstream media stance on this, Keir Starmer's doing the right thing. He might be weak. He might not be enabled. He might be in a really difficult position, out of weapons, no money, but at least he's trying to fight the evil Putin. So fair, reasonable position to take if the narrative is true. But the counter narrative is that that's not true, but there's no room for dissent. The counter narrative you will not see. I mean, just get smeared as a Russian. I mean, I went into a local business that I've been into for 20 years. I go there probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 times a year. So not a lot, but they know me by name when I go in there. We were talking because they'd heard your podcast. And one of the guys in there said, I saw you on this podcast. I was chatting away. And one of the ladies in the shop, we were talking about it. She said to me, that's Russian propaganda. I said, do you think so? And she said, I know so. I'm Ukraine. There was never there'd never been a coup. And we talked about the trade union house where they burnt people alive. She said, no, that's Russian propaganda. Have you not heard of AI? They would have faked it all. And I didn't argue or anything like that. I said, okay, I will have a look at that. It's fine. But the belief is really entrenched. That's my point. And
wow.
how do you change that? Time is the answer. What's the secret to bad speech? More speech. You just need the narrative to be questioned. George Galloway, I mean, who is a friend of mine. I love him. He's great. It's absolutely fantastic. George has, offered many, many times to get Boris Johnson, the previous Prime Minister, in the Royal Albert Hall in London and debate this. I mean, he would fill it. You'd fill the place. Trust me. There's no way the state would do that.
Right.
There's no way the state would do that.
I've seen George Galloway. I've seen videos of him debate people, and nobody should go in that arena unless they are really tight.
It's really good. I mean, I've said this before, but I love saying it because it's true, and it's a fun thing to say. Back just over a year ago, he was due to debate at the Oxford Union the former Defence Secretary or Defence Minister Ben Wallace. Ben didn't turn up, so just George Galloway said his piece, and obviously Ben wasn't there to counter him. And I happened, just by coincidence, to be in the Ministry of Defence on Whitehall the day after, and we're all sat in Horse Guards Parade above where the horses are, and the tourists are outside. We're in an office above there, just above the arch, and we're all sat there drinking cups of tea, talking about it. And one of the senior members of staff in there turned around and said, I don't blame Ben for not turning up. I wouldn't have turned up to that. And they'd all watched it. And one of the guys said, if I'd known about that, I would have paid to have been there because they were really interested.
But I've seen that video, and it's fascinating. He just did a brilliant job.
It's fantastic. Yeah. But how many people in Britain even know that debate took place. Tiny percentage. And there's the point. That's the problem.
And, you know, one of the ways you counter some of that is like what we do on this show. You can accuse us of parroting Russian propaganda, I guess, but we put all the sides on there. We're going to do that again here today. And we're going to say here, we're going to let people speak for themselves about what their viewpoints are. And then people get a chance to say, all right, based on what these different people said who have very different viewpoints, what does the ground look like? That's one of the reasons we love this show. And I think when people do that, they come to different conclusions. So in that light, we're going to say a little bit about what does the Russian side say, and we're going to see what the European side says. Because to your point, there's a big diversion between the two. So first of all, here's Lavrov. He was asked a question, and this was earlier today, about the so-called coalition of the willing on the European side and what they want to accomplish. Here's what he said.
They didn't specify in their name what they are willing for. Apparently, they are willing for a sense of their own superiority, the ability to decide things as they please, without listening, ignoring the opinions of others. In modern Europe, this is linked to the trend of reviving Nazi views, habits, and mannerisms. But this is not the language to use with Russia. If this coalition of the willing is led by even remotely sane leaders, then I think they should realize this quickly. Otherwise, they will step onto the path of war without any reservations.
So Lavrov is anything if not very diplomatic and very measured. You never hear him ranting and raving and screaming, but his words there are pretty stark. That, listen, I don't know what you guys think your coalition is willing to do, but unless you want to move down a path that could lead to war, you might want to reconsider that. I think that's a warning that we should probably pay attention to.
Absolutely. I mean, he's like a Jedi warrior, isn't he? He's just speaks common sense.
Don't you love how measured he is?
Really measured. He's always calm.
Yeah.
You know, I can't imagine him losing his temper. I can imagine him raising his voice to emphasize something. But could I imagine him shouting in anger at somebody? No, I could just imagine him really being emphatic. But yeah, he's great. He's great, and he's the work of the devil, according to the British state. There's no room for dissent.
Yeah, over the weekend he was on a CBS show, I think Face the Nation, whatever. Margaret Brennan was interviewing Lavrov, and she had asked him a question regarding the upcoming talks. She goes, are they actually going to happen? And Lavrov just said, well, don't you believe your own president?
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, the coalition of the willing, or what, I don't know what, the coalition of the disunited. They're united on one thing. They're absolutely uniquely united on their dislike and hatred of Russia and all things Russian. But that's about it. There's no money there's no people to go and do any killing. There's no weapons to go and do any killing. There's no strategy to do any killing. But that said, I was just mentioning off air just before we came on, I got a call last week when I was abroad in Greece from a colonel, British colonel, now based in Germany, and he is going to be part of a small, and I when I asked what does small mean, I mean, is that 100, is that 20 guys, is that 100 guys, 500 guys, what does small mean? And he said, well, small, and that's what I was told. A small team to go into Ukraine, and he was handpicking a team to go in as peacekeepers. And I said, when are you likely to go in? And he said, when there's peace. I know. He seemed to feel that. He said it'd be quite an easy job. But it's just, I mean, I personally don't ever believe that he's going to be going there.
Well, again, I just can't understand why anybody would even give a what's called prepare to deploy order in the U.S. in the U.S. military parlance. Why would you get a prepare to deploy order when the other side is categorically against any NATO member state, regardless of what flag they fly under, et cetera, to be part of any peacekeeping contingents? Russia is apparently willing to consider peacekeepers to enforce or at least monitor any kind of an end of negotiation, an end of term, war negotiations that come out. but they said it won't be them and they wouldn't agree to it. And if some come in without being agreed to by the Russian side, they will simply be considered as enemy combatants and they will be treated as such and attacked. So I just can't understand, why does either France or Britain think that we're going to get actually prepared to do something that either won't be accepted or could lead to war? Explain that to me.
Okay, because very, very clearly we have a different perception. When I say we, I don't talk about myself in that. The royal we, the Brits, we have a different perception of what that means. So, for example, Ben Wallace has said this previously when he was the defence minister. Ukraine is a sovereign, and Starmer said this. Ukraine is a independent sovereign nation. It has the choice on who it deploys on its border. So if he wants to put American weapons there, Brazilian weapons, British weapons, whatever on its border, it can. It's sovereign. It can.
I agree with that. That is a true statement. I don't dispute that.
Absolutely. So, but it's a straw man because nobody could disagree with that. But then you have to say, okay, compromise isn't a dirty word. So, okay, let's get the Russians putting their missiles and Russian crack troops on the border of Mexico. The Americans would have a fit. They'd have a heart attack. There'd be World War III in minutes. And the Russians wouldn't be. I would even add,
though, even before you get too much further down the road there, in the same logic of that Ukraine is an independent country and they can put whoever they want on their border, Russia is also an independent country and they can do whatever they want on their side of the border, i.e. they can't attack them. So it's not one side or the other. You got to take both of them into consideration.
No, well, that's why I say compromise isn't a dirty word. So when I say, Danny, I'm going to do you're my neighbor, I'm going to do all of this stuff on my fence that's going to really aggravate you, but it's on my fence and there's nothing you can do. And you say, well, if you do that, it's going to really aggravate myself and my family, and we're going to feel threatened by your behavior. Well, compromise, me saying, well, okay, maybe I won't do this and maybe I won't do that, isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of maturity. But we don't have that mentality. I mean, it's almost comical that when Biden was questioned about putting troops, American troops on the border of Russia, and it being a red line for Russia, he said, "We don't recognize your red line." And there's your problem. There's your problem. You know, I'm going to do all this stuff to you, Danny, on your doorstep, and it's going to really antagonize you and your family. And I said, well, I don't care about Danny and his family. There's the problem. And that's where we are.
And that's where also the Russians recognize. In that same interview, he was asked, Lavrov was, what do you think about the European leaders and what is the countermeasures that the Russian side could take?
We see how the same Macron, Starmer, and now even Friedrich Merz, on the eve of assuming the chancellorship, are shouting militant, hostile slogans, threatening the Russian Federation. I don't think this reflects the position of the French or German people. Apparently, these leaders already understand that if they follow the path of decisions, views and aspirations voiced during elections, they won't be able to build their careers. They want to cling to power through such shocking hostility. I will repeat once again, we have strong nerves. President Putin has said many times that we are ready to discuss any issues, but of course, we are polite people and expect basic decency from those who will inevitably turn to us.
So again, very measured terms here, saying all this nonsense and noise that we keep getting from everybody else on the European side. We have nerve steels, and you will inevitably turn to us, I think, because he sees the dynamic of power, and that conversation could be a little different. And in fact, one of the things that the Western side has been complaining about was that Russia attacked this. They launched a missile strike into Kiev a couple of days ago. They launch missiles nearly every night, and they're saying, "See, they are not committed to peace. They're not wanting to have this negotiated settlement. They don't want a ceasefire because they're the impediment to peace." And the question is, when did Russia ever say they were going to stop fighting? They have never said that.
No.
And even this alleged energy deal, the don't hit the energy infrastructure, that's already expired, which I don't know that anybody ever fully operated it. But now Russia has said, we'll stop fighting when we come to an agreement and not. But then the West wants to change that around and say, well, you're fighting, so that means you don't want peace, because the West side is saying with Zelensky, we'll have an unconditional ceasefire for 30 days. And Russia says, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And instead of saying, why would they do that? They just want to say, see, that's how bad Russia is. And Russia's going, yeah, look, y'all can say that all day long, but the reality on the ground continues to go to the West.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the Brits and the Germans and the French, they're on a narrative. They're not on a strategy. There's nothing. There's no real overall strategic thinking. They're just following a political narrative that's against the Russians. But here's the problem. This is what I think. This is how I think it will pan out and where it will go. Personally, I don't have a crystal ball, I'm afraid. But we will, I say we, the Brits, we'll be like in a barroom brawl. And, you two, Danny and Gary are holding me back. And I'm there like ready to, listen, hold me back, guys, because I'm ready to go in. And you go, no, Ian, don't do it. No, don't do it. No, I'm ready to go in. No, don't holding me back. I think that's what Keir Starmer, Macron, and what the Germans are doing, because it's easy to go, come on, I'm ready for you. Just come on, rush me. I'm coming. And everyone hold me back because I'm so hard and so tough. Because I don't have to fight anyone, because the Russians, as I said, are quite polite and they're ready to openly discuss and try and find resolution here. So we're just going to keep talking tough until the Trump thing happens. And I believe that will happen at some point. I don't believe the Americans will walk away. The Americans need to make this work because they started it. So they have to.
Yeah, you don't think Trump would walk away?
No, I know. I think he would very much walk away, but I don't think he will. Do I think he's got? Do I think he's got the ability to walk away? Absolutely. But I think that they will stay and try and make this work.
Well, they'll only stay as long as they have somebody on the European side or the Ukraine.
I'm being paid a lot of money to say that, by the way.
Yeah.
Someone will say that.
Not being paid enough, I think.
No, not enough. No.
Because look, I think because see, Trump is coming up on our domestic side here. He's coming up on a decision point to where he has said that with both himself, the vice president, secretary of state, that look, y'all either come up with a deal that we can live with, or we're going to walk. If he doesn't walk, and apparently, and it continued, if the European side continues to say we're not going to play that way, and then Trump doesn't walk, and he does keep supporting, now then he's been defeated politically, and he's seen as weak. And Trump doesn't like to be seen as weak.
No,
so I think that there's a good chance that he could roll. What do you think, Gary?
Oh, I think very much so. Especially, I thought it was interesting yesterday with the interview that you did with the Russian ambassador Dmitry Peskov, that he portrayed Zelensky as a cog in the machine. He's just an actor. He does not want peace. He's not willing to capitulate in any way, which is why he keeps Zelensky keeps restanding his ground. And what he said about Crimea this week, that there was no way they were going to be surrendering that land. So the ambassador explained that, listen, we see him for what he is, Zelensky. We see him for what he is. That, he basically, without saying that he was illegitimate, he basically said he's an illegitimate actor, and that's all he's doing is acting. He's playing a role. He has no interest in seeking peace, finding peace, and that's what he's there. Zelensky is only there to prolong the war. That's how they see it, and that's why he also said, the ambassador said, that's why we're on the battlefield. That's what we're doing. We've got a clown that's trying to make some negotiations. We don't believe it. We see it for what it is. We will fight until we have to stop fighting, but it doesn't look like it's anytime soon.
No.
Yeah, I think
no, I agree. I mean, I agree. I agree. But I do think, just reiterate what I said. Do I think Trump would say, sorry, I've had enough, we're off? Absolutely. He's got the ability to do that and would and could do that. But I still think he will try and be seen to be the peacemaker. believe that.
Oh yeah,
I
he
believe
definitely wants to be. I don't see any doubt about that. But I think that he'll come to a point to where if I
Zelensky's a
can't
nobody.
make peace, if he can't make peace, then he may say, "I'm going to have to just walk away so that I don't be part of the loss that would come from that." You mentioned that some people say, "Oh well, you guys are just talking Russian talking points there." Okay, so you just saw Lavrov talk about how a lot of hostility from the Western side and a lot of the leaders, and he specifically mentioned Starmer and Macron. Well, you can listen to what people say and then come to your own conclusions. And between Macron and Sergei Lavrov, who is closer to what's actually happened? Because here is one of the things Emmanuel Macron did say. Okay, so Putin's just lying. You hear that all the time. You've mentioned that a few times. He's all evil. And when is he going to agree to a full ceasefire? He's never said that he's willing to do a ceasefire unless there are big conditions. He won't do an unconditional ceasefire. No. So why do you expect him to? And where is the lie in any of that?
Well, Putin, as Trump's clearly said many times when he was talking to Zelensky, you don't have any cards. If you work with us, you've got some cards, but you don't have any cards. Well, Macron's the same. Macron's got no cards. What cards has Macron got? But, he's talking tough. Everybody else is a liar because he's still on that different page of narrative. He's not with the West. This is an unprovoked war, and we need to be doing the right thing by fighting off these aggressive bullies. And if you believe that, it's, as I said before, it's a fair position. You accept that's a fair thing. You've got an aggressive person starting a war for no reason. We've got to club together and stop it. It's a completely fair thing to say. And he's still, because most people believe that. So he's espousing that, and the people in Europe believe that, unfortunately.
Well, see, I want that one of our viewers here asked a question. I thought it was poignant because on the one hand, it would seem that Starmer and Macron are just, a bunch of blah, blah, blah. They're just talkers, but they're never going to actually act on it. But somebody said, yeah, but what if they did act on it? Do you think that it's, from what you've seen, do you think that they would ever actually send their troops into Ukraine?
No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I believe that it's all talk. It's, they've cornered themselves. They've put themselves in this position where if you don't do this, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. Well, they've got to be seen to be at least trying to do that and doing it at a snail's pace, not just because they don't have any money and they don't have any weapons, but they're trying to buy time while these, whatever the negotiations, whatever you care to call them, are happening between Trump's people and the Russians. They're a sideshow. They're a sideshow. There's nothing going to happen. I was talking to one of my close friends who's in special forces. We've talked about him many times. He's off at the moment with his family, and he was saying, he said that we have no chance against Russia. He said Russia hasn't even deployed its crack special forces in this operation. It's just insane. So, all the European stuff is a sideshow. Before they were calling the shots, now they're not. And that's the problem.
You talk about what Russia could do. You mentioned this before about this narrative that Russia either is fighting with shovels and they can't even defeat Ukraine, or they're going to be coming to get us. Now, it's laughable on the one hand, but then on the other hand, it's permeated at the highest levels. We're not just talking about somebody on X, or they said this, or some social media said that. We're talking about the Secretary General of NATO. So here he is just a couple of days ago at the White House, for crying out loud, after he had just met with Trump, says this about Putin in Russia.
I don't know. I worked with him for 4 years between 2010 and 2014 when I was Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and I stopped trying to read his mind. You mean President Putin? Huh? President Putin. You meant the Russian president? Yeah. Yes. So I worked with him for 4 years between 2010 and 2014. I stopped trying to read his mind. We'll see, but there is something on the table now, I think, where the Ukrainians are really playing ball. And I think the ball is clearly in the Russian court now. We all agree in NATO that Russia is the long-term threat to NATO territory, to the whole of the Euro-Atlantic territory.
So Russia's the long-term threat. You referred to that just a second ago. But what is he talking about when Ukraine is working hard for peace and the ball is in Russia's court? Russia has been unequivocal and clear from before the war started and at every point through the 3 years, especially now, reiterating what their conditions are. And how is the ball in their court if they're waiting on the Ukraine side?
All I could say, it must be extremely frustrating for Trump and Vance and that team to talk to the Europeans. I think they've had enough of the Europeans, but no doubt about that whatsoever. And NATO. And NATO is American soft power. NATO, without the US, is not NATO. It doesn't exist. It's going to collapse. I think that possibly NATO might morph into a EU type army. And the Americans will still be there. I don't believe the Americans will ever leave. I think they'll still be there, but in a less strong capacity. And then the Europeans will just sort it out amongst themselves, which just will be a very expensive bureaucratic machine.
Yeah, Danny, I don't know if you remember, we had Patrick Bob, a German journalist, on this week, and that was exactly his assessment because of the way that Trump is basically forcing NATO's hand to take on all of the economy of war, and what they would have to do not only to potentially fight the war, but then also to rebuild Ukraine. It's a price they can't possibly pay. And the way Patrick described it is that basically, they would not go bankrupt, but they literally just will not have the money to pull it off. And then therefore would just start to disintegrate because any smart politician would get the heck out of Dodge when they see the burden that would be put upon them. And as Trump leaves and puts the financial burden on them, the weight of their incapacity to be able to take that on would basically just make them slowly crumble. He predicted like in 10 years, it would just dissolve.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that entirely. Yeah, I can see that.
And so let me ask you, Ian. You said a second ago that you thought that Trump could walk, but you didn't think that he would.
No.
And if he, let's look at one of two ways, first of all, and the reaction from the European side. In the one hand, let's say that he just gets frustrated and just basically just moves on to something else, but just doesn't withdraw or so. But there's no new money in the pipeline. There's no new packages even promised. This is all just what's left over from the Biden administration's passage of that $61 billion a year ago in May. So if Trump just says, all right, I'll just keep pretending to talk. What are the Europeans going to do? Are they just going to say, yay, we can just keep having the fiction going on, or will they actually take any action?
Well, they're not going to take any action. How can they take any action? They don't have any money. They're all indebted. The German economy is in a terrible state. They don't have any weapons, and then they've got the big bear on their doorstep threatening to invade, which obviously it's a nonsense threat. It's not a real threat. It's a fictitious. It's a fiction. So I think Colonel McGregor's stated this many times in the past. Europe needs new leaders. That's how you get new leaders. So we can all be walking around in circles.
Get a clean house.
And the Europeans themselves are going to have to do it, because I think Gary just said, are the politicians smart enough to figure out that you can't go down a path that you don't have the money for? And maybe the answer is no, because and let me ask you this, because you're a lot more tied into the electoral issues in especially the UK, but also in Europe. If these guys keep with this fiction, really, whether Trump walks or he doesn't, the same net is going to happen. There's not going to be any more support. So from the United States, so it's either going to be Europe continuing to deplete their coffers more and their inventories more, or Ukraine is just going to lose the war. And if these guys stay with this narrative, won't that come up in the next election?
Well, it should do, if we live in a free and fair democracy where we make assumptions that all of these issues are on the table are going to be openly discussed, but they're not. Ukraine going to win the war? The Ukraine's already lost the war. The war is lost. As you and I have a discussion now, young lads are being killed on both sides for nothing, for absolutely no reason. The Brits and the Europeans are very happy for those poor Ukrainian lads that are pulled off the streets. We've seen the videos online where it's happening, and sent to their deaths for what? For nothing. And on the other side, Russian lads are being killed. But I think while the blood is being spilt by somebody else, we are happy to fund it. And the proof's in the pudding, because up until now, we're talking about telephone numbers. We're not talking about here's some money, try and do your best. We're talking about telephone numbers. We're talking about borrowing money and creating debt to create more debt. So if we're happy to do that now, why would that change? Because that borrowing and that debt is based on the premise of a lie. And until that narrative changes, we're going to keep doing it because it's the right thing to do. We have to stop the Russians before they come for us. I mean, it's nonsense. But if you believe that, you've got to do it. And there's no room for dissent. People believe it.
Well, they're either going to stop believing it when Ukraine military loses, or when they run out of money and all of a sudden these countries start getting bankrupt and they don't have enough for even social services or so, then the narrative could change. But that could be a while. So that's a terrible situation.
But it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to, as you say, it could be a while. And that's more debt, and more importantly, more death, more blood. Would Britain and the EU fund this if they could? Assuming that there's enough young lads in Ukraine ready to die, not ready because they don't have any choice to die for this, another 6 to 8 months to a year? The answer is yes.
I can't argue with that. Yeah,
it's outrageous. It
truly is. That's been one of the things that's most disheartening to me is how easy and unconcerned, especially in the previous administration, it was in the U.S. and so many of these other folks about how many people in Ukraine died to fund this fiction. And it's egregious. And I bet they wouldn't like it if it was their citizens that were dying like this. But
of course.
Anyway,
that's the problem.
But as always, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing these insights. And actually, before we let you go, Gary, Gary's got something he wants to share.
You guys, I don't even know if you guys are familiar, but there's just a handful of stories that I thought really went under the radar, and it's a shame because they shouldn't have gone under the radar. I just wanted to just bring them up so that we could just pay a little bit of attention to this. For example, this happened this week. A meeting took place in London between the Ukraine delegation. Keith Kellogg, Trump's special envoy, he was there, and they sat down. This was earlier on in the week. Anything about this picture? You know what's crazy about this picture? They're trying to fool us. This is the children's table at Thanksgiving. We all know that. We see that. Who are they trying to kid? Where's Zelensky? Where's Rubio? They're not there.
No, there's no heavyweights there.
David Lammy's not even there. This is in London, isn't it? Where's David Lammy?
Yeah. Who are they trying to fool? We see this for what it is. You don't even have to read between. It's a sideshow. It is. You don't even have to read between the lines, right? So this is what they're trying to pull off. So I just think we're hip to them. That's all. And I just think it's an insult to us to put that out like that, and that we don't see it for what it is. So I just wanted to make sure that we all paid attention to that.
If only there was mac and cheese on the table, then it would. I
would go large for 30p.
Another upsetting story here on this side of the Atlantic, where Judge Hannah Dugan arrested by the FBI for allegedly helping undocumented immigrant evade arrest. How about that? Now this is a judge, a sitting judge. A Milwaukee County Circuit judge has been arrested by the FBI over allegedly helping an undocumented immigrant evade arrest. The FBI Director Patel said in a social media post. So, Patel brought this to the attention. Now, the really sad part about this is that the judge here, Judge Hannah, she says she's not going to have anything else to say about this until they give her back her dentures.
Ouch.
So
this one here is troubling for more than just the surface level issue that you had a member of the judiciary that's trying to thwart law enforcement, or at least that's what's being alleged. We'll see how it actually works out. But it's also working in the other direction. In other parts of the judiciary, the administration has been ordered to do certain things, and they have just summarily ignored it. And so all of these things together continue to weaken the rule of law, because you have some people ignoring the law one place, and then you have another group ignoring the law in a different place, and they're all wrong. this judge is wrong if she's guilty of what she's saying. The administration's wrong if they're not going to obey that, because the minute that you break down the separation of powers that are so fundamental to our way of life in this country between the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative branch, if you break those down to where now all of a sudden there's not the balance of power, there's just one that's going to elevate, then you have some real problems.
It's true. I mean, I don't know. I think I might be wrong. So if I'm wrong, please forgive me. But I think the undocumented immigrant involved in this case wasn't actually physically arrested himself. But I think you're right about this just breakdown in law and order, and in the systems and processes that should hold the whole thing together. Now, it's never ever going to be fully held together because we're human beings, and we're just trying to herd sheep and goats and cats. It just doesn't always work. Most people are compliant, but plenty aren't. It just makes me think of the late 70s and early 80s when New York, I mean, there were movies that came out in the late 80s, I think called was it The Wanderers or The Warriors, where they had gangs in New York and they had territories, and one gang went into another's, they would fight and all this kind of stuff. But the subways were graffitied with all the taglines from all the various
wait, that's
gangs.
real.
And that, absolutely real. And there were areas that were so bad in New York that the police would not physically go into those areas at night. And it took one guy to sort it out, a guy called Bill Bratton. And I don't know if he was the mayor of New York or if he was the head of the New York Police Department. But
he's a chief commissioner. He's a police commissioner.
It was the head of the police. And he literally took one area and had zero tolerance. And his policy was
broken windows theory.
One broken window left unbroken, another one breaks, and all of a sudden you've got an area with broken windows everywhere. It looks tatty and no one cares for it, and it's not loved, it's not looked after. And he would literally just take on one specific area and throw all resources at it and clean it up and take control of it, and then move on, and then collectively he was able to take the city back. But America's, I mean, I'm not here to point the finger at you guys. I mean, America's very broken, but so are we. So are we.
Well, let's hope Judge Hannah Dugan gets her dentures back. That's what I say. That's what I want to see happen before anything else. All right. So let's get that happening. Then the other thing, I think you guys know that President Trump had his yearly physical. He passed with flying colors, surprisingly, right? But what I thought was really cool is it. Oh yeah, that too. Yeah, but this is different. See, because Trump takes it to another level. He says, all this golf, playing these 18 holes and stuff. That's good. Let me show them really what I'm capable of doing. So now, unbelievably, over the weekend, instead of going to the golf course, this is what our president was doing.
That was a nice shot right there. Oh yeah,
fantastic. And if you notice, when he's running down the field here, he elbows this guy. Watch. Here it comes. He's going to elbow him. Boom! He knocks him right down. Man, isn't that the way to go?
Yeah, good for him.
MAGA. Fantastic.
Good for him. It's great. It's good.
That's the way to go. That's the way to go. There's our man.
Yeah, that man is in shape. So it's all true, obviously. So
he's a killer.
Anyway. All right. Well, listen, appreciate you always, Ian, as we always do. And we'll look forward to seeing you back next week.
Thank you.
And we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Amen.